when I got married, my wife Blanche said, I want one favor of you. I thought only one of my own mind. And she said, I don't want to spend a summer in New York City. And she had always spent her summers out in Lindenhurst. Her father was a medical doctor. And when she was very young, he drove out 1 hour from his practice, ended up in Lindenhurst. And there happened to be a sale going on. He bought a bungalow. It was on the shore. It was, they called it Little Venice. So she always spent the summers out there, a child, I mean. And so we never did. And when we got married, we went out to Lindenhurst, where it was, where she had spent those early years. But after the first 3 years, the tract of land and the canal where the house, the bungalow was bought up. It was between Montauk Highway and Little Venice, as they called it, Little Venice. And in one winter, they must have built 1,000 houses and sold them all. So when we came back the next summer, it was a grown community. They had spent, it doesn't take long. You spend 6 months in your house, it's like you've been there forever. And these were not brand new couples, and the houses were not all tiny. So they came with their families, and the streets were filled with kids playing during the summertime. And I used to work on the porch of the bungalow, a small space, but it got really too noisy, and I said to Blanche, I have to rearrange my schedule, so I'm going to start working at 10 o'clock at night. And I'll work through into the morning, and then I'll sleep during the early morning, and then we'll have the middle of the day, because we had a young family too. And so that's what happened after a couple of years. And then it got to be really rough, because after that first season, when I got back to New York, I was teaching in a junior high school. I couldn't fall asleep. I was waking up at night, which is what I had been doing for all summer. So I would loll around in bed trying to go to sleep. And probably I did get to sleep, but maybe at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was up in 2 hours getting ready for school. It was a rough year. And it's like traveling when you're going by plane from one place to another. You're just not keyed up for the time. It wasn't another country and time zone, but I had built myself into that. So we had a long discussion, and we said, among other things, we had a lot of plans. I used to bring them from New York to Lindenhurst. We said, we got to get away, far enough away so that I don't have to transport anything in multiple trips. We didn't have any money. We had only a little Beetle. Everything was being done with that little VW Beetle. And so we said, we got to get away. So that year, I took a couple of Fridays. I didn't end early, but I spoke to my principal and said, listen, I've got something very important to do. I had a couple of study periods at the end of my Friday. I said, let me get out of those study periods. I have to leave early. I got to go to Maine. And if I leave 2 hours early, it's a big deal, because those 2 hours, I can rush up there and get there before it's absolutely black, find myself a hotel, or if I have a friend up there, get to them, and I have very important things to do. So she said yes. I made a couple of trips to Maine, and on one of those trips I found this place. And it was very early days. Didn't have any money. I had to borrow money from friends to do it. It's another world, another time. The place cost $8,000, which was a lot of money then, which is not a lot of money now. But it made possible this. And when I came up to Maine, I was now confronting the Maine landscape, a country landscape for the first time. I'm a city-bred court. My parents came from Poland. They were like most people who come from a foreign country, come into the big cities to look for jobs. And so what do you know about the country? You can't afford to go away for a summer, for a whole summer, and at least maybe not until your family gets settled and your father has enough money, earned enough money. So it was just beyond me. So here we are, we have a house, I'm up in Maine, and there's an orchard behind me in the backyard. About 40, 50 trees. I'd never really painted trees before, I mean, except in the crudest of ways. So I set myself up to paint the tree. And what did I know about painting trees? I knew what they looked like in 19th century paintings. Who wanted to paint like a 19th century painter? I had the history of French painting and their painting behind me, but that's all. I was already in the 20th century, and they were 19th century painters. I didn't want to paint like an impressionist painter, so I started to learn. And out of it came representational painting. I painted my apple trees, and then you find out who you are. So while you're painting and while you're looking, you're growing, you're checking, you're testing, you're denying, you're accepting, and then my apple trees grew into something else, and then out came this. In the foreground here are frames. You see the frames?
Yeah.
You see the color is different in this frame than that frame. Look at this frame right here. The color is different. The color is different in this frame or in this frame. And then I generalized all these other areas.
Beautiful.
And out of it comes an apple tree that people swear by that I did it by photograph. You see this branch is dropped?
Mm-hmm.
The same branch coming down. Painted it a second time. Now this, I didn't really put, now also, this was generalized after the fact. And this was generalized after the fact. You can see it's not specified in the way in which this is specified or this is specified. These are kind of simply done. This is framed right here, more so than this is framed, although it is framed a little bit. This little piece of patch, which is very dramatic, I'm looking at now. I think I framed this piece right here. See how contrasty it is? Very different part. Anyway, it's all put together. It's all put together because I came out every day. I carried these paintings out every day. I would set it up, and I would look at my painting and look at the tree, and I would find the most dramatic spot I could, and then go to it and work on that part of the painting. And it was that accumulation of fake stuff, false stuff, pieces of the tree that are brought together in an accumulation. And out of that comes the fact that I believe the world we see is never the world that there is, because we are accumulating our recollections from day to day to day throughout our lifetime. And if we live in the same place, we're putting them all together. And all those disparate things that are so different from one another, we just make into a unit, a workable, realistic unit that we call reality. And it's not reality. I mean, it is reality. It's our reality. But it's not photographic reality. The photograph is fake because it's one day, one moment, and the photograph is locked in, and you can't bring to it in the photograph all that other experience before and after. The only thing that makes the photograph great is because we're bringing ourselves to it. And all of our subsequent experiences that grow in us, and we see the photograph, we take that little piece and it reminds us of everything else that has accumulated over a long period of time. And recollection. We're all part of telling stories and recollections and all of that business about what goes on. So that's what painting is. Painting is an ongoing flow. And people will say, this one doesn't look quite like your painting the last time. It's all the same stuff. There's only a slight variation. Like changing shoes. I don't look the same because I got a different pair of shoes on. A different shirt on. But it's the same stuff, the same hand. What did I say to someone the other day? They thought it was nice. I said, the hand never changes, it's the brain that changes. The hand stays the same, it's the brain that's ongoing. I'm 89 and I painted since I was, I painted since I was 3. Drawn since I was 3. But as a painter, I painted my first oil painting when I was 17. I never had an oil, my parents couldn't afford to buy an oil set for me, so I never had any oil paints until then. I think my painting is a part of the long process. I'm doing things that are growing. My best line is when someone says to me, "Are you painting?" I said, "When you hear I'm not painting, I'm dead." This is like one of the earliest paintings I did. Now the hot spot is in this painting, the big frame. Where is it?
Right
You can see the big arch,
Yeah.
right? Right there. This is the big first piece. When I did this painting, I went out there, I painted that first. And then I did this little bit, I may have done it the next day. And then I went up here. And you see how generalized this area is? It's just a kind of smoky foliage. And I drew a little bit of the branching and all of it. I sort of went up here, got into this area. And I got another frame out over in this section. A little frame down in here. But that's the framing out. That's the beginning of all of this. The start of this. Early on in coming to Maine and painting trees. These are not the first trees I painted. I did them in very different style. In those days, everyone had an enamel top table.
Yeah.
You remember an enamel top table?
Yeah.
You could clean it, wash it down, everything was taken care of that way. So I said, I need an enamel top table for my palette, and I'll set it up so that I'm doing 2 paintings at the same time. One from one side of the table, one from the other side of the table. In those days, I didn't clean my palette every day, but after a little while, I cleaned my palette on the enamel top table every day. Now I'm going to tell you, I just remind myself, a really funny story. I'm painting my painting. I used a lot of cadmium green because I'm working on trees. I had a lot of greens, and cadmium green is a critical, it's a bright color. Roger, my neighbor, who had sheep in the field where I was, because it was in the working in the orchard. A lot of hay grew there. He used to have sheep eating the grass and all of that. They would eat the dropped apples. It would help the health of the tree. He gets 3 horses, and the horses are wandering around. And horses got very interested in me, and they used to hang around a little bit. I was working on one of my paintings, and it was only about a week and a half or 2 weeks after Roger comes back, and one of them was a mare, a pale mare. It was for the daughter. You're laughing. I come out one day and the horse comes up to me and he's got cadmium green on his lips. And I noticed that my palette was clean. They licked the paint off the table. But the green was visible on his lips. Now this is cadmium. It's killer stuff. I never said anything to Roger about it. But about 3 or 4 months later, the horse died.
Oh, no.
So I felt I went to Roger, I said, "Roger, I killed your horse." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I came out one day, they licked my table clean, and he had cadmium green lips." He wouldn't believe me. To his dying day, he never believed me but I killed his horse. that horse died from cadmium green and cleaning up the paint on that table. I'm so convinced of it. Maybe the other horses didn't have enough, but that's the cadmium green story. But that convinced me. The next day after that occurrence, I cleaned my enamel top table of paint. And every day thereafter, I cleaned the table. But I think I killed the horse. When I was in school, among the things I did, I guess I was a different kid. I mean, I was the best artist at school in my day. Among all my peers, I was the best artist among the group. I considered the best artist. I was looked up to. I did a lot of work and all that. And among the things I did, because I didn't have a lot of money, we were pretty poor. I mean, we weren't destitute, but we didn't have any money. Not enough money. And my parents were working class parents. Growing up an artist is not what my family had. They didn't want me to be an artist. I'm Jewish in a Jewish family. The last thing they needed was not to be. You got to be competitive in the world. Try to do something where you can get a job. So that kind of business was always there, and so I mean I know my friends and colleagues. Many of them were working class families. Some of them had parents who owned businesses, who were fairly well to do. I knew from their dress and all of that. Anyway, I was who I was, and I didn't have that availability. So I didn't have a great deal. But I did draw the way others did. And I did a lot of crayon drawing. Common crayon drawing, the stuff that's available. The Crayola boxes, you know. And, but I did very interesting stuff, complicated stuff. My teachers liked it. They were always befuddled. I said, you know, what about crayon drawings? Forget about it, paint, you know. They looked askance at crayon drawings, and I tried to say, what's wrong with crayon? You know, and there are people who do work in crayon, but not in a lasting way. So I had my drawing books, and they were interested in me. My teachers were very good to me. They talked to me a great deal. And I was well known among my teachers, and I saw them after graduation and things of that sort. But I had no introduction to landscape, and everybody didn't even paint the cityscape, because they didn't have any paints at that time. I mean, I had made my first painting at 17, but I didn't have any paint. I didn't have enough oil paint in school. I only got oil paint for my class in oil painting, and I didn't buy an oil paint set. I bought some tubes, got brushes and so on, and managed in that way. But I fell in love. Now, some of my history. When I was in school, I was always gifted and always known, even in high school. And along with the line of my parents' thoughts, I said, I'll go to Brooklyn College, which is free, by the way. My parents didn't have to pay for school. I was going to go into advertising. But I was still thinking, I'm going to go to Brooklyn College. I knew that they were forward-looking, abstract-oriented, abstract painter-oriented, Bauhaus school. I had learned enough about that. So my concept was learn it all and bring that to advertising. It's not there yet. And you'll be a really modern advertiser. But I fell in love. Fell in love with painting. And when I got out of school, I was already a committed painter in my own mind. But when I got out of school, the Korean War was in operation, in process, and I got drafted into the Army. So that was another 2 years away. I was drafted. I went to Germany. I didn't go to Korea, luckily, and came back. And I applied for a job at Brooklyn College. They all knew me, the faculty there, and I got myself a teaching job at Brooklyn College, part-time. I also got a part-time teaching job in New Jersey. I got a teaching job, a full-time teaching job in elementary school in New Jersey. Not elementary, junior high school in New Jersey. So I was teaching in New Jersey, in Newark State College, Brooklyn College, and at Pratt. I got a job at Pratt as well. So I was very busy driving, doing an awful lot of driving. I was newly married, had one son at that time, and living in Brooklyn. So it was and slowly things began. So I taught at Brooklyn College for a number of years, part-time. I finally left my teaching job in New Jersey. I got an appointment at Brooklyn College. I had a choice of working either full-time at Pratt or at Brooklyn College. Pratt seemed too iffy, and it was too uncertain, so I took Brooklyn College. It was a good choice. And then at Brooklyn College, I was part-time. I got a line. That means I was permanent. But then I had to get reappointed, and I wasn't going to get a reappointment full-time. But then accidents happened. So I was teaching, and I was probably going to be dropped. But Jimmy Ernst, who is one of my colleagues now, got a heart attack. So I took over Jimmy's program, and from that I got a reappointment. And so I was now a full-time person, instead of being an iffy person, working full-time but not going to be on a full line. So when you get a full line, it's still uncertain, but things continue to grow, and I began to show a little more, and your reputation grows, and then I took over. It's because I had some teaching experience, and Wolf, who was the chairman of the department, who was a Bauhaus person. He came out of the Bauhaus. So he came from Chicago to take over the chairmanship at Brooklyn College. And since he was the teaching person, there was an element in the department where teachers were being trained to teach in high school or junior high school or elementary school. So he took over that, and he ran that for a number of years. And then he was declining a little bit, and when I went to see Wolf, I proposed to him that I take over the teaching section. And he was very happy. He was a wonderful painter. An abstract painter. So I took over the teaching of it, and it grew with me. And I grew that in such a way that I said to the people when they were supposed to go out and teach in the junior high schools and high schools, teach classes. So when I would go out to supervise a class, I would say to them, this is not right. I come out here 2 or 3 times to see them teach 2 or 3 classes. They're not trained to be teachers. I mean, they may turn out to be good teachers, but they're not really trained to be teachers. Would you be open to my arranging for you to take one of our teachers into your department, so they come to you every single day during the entire semester, and you assign them to visit the classes, but give them one class. I mean, you have to have a teacher in the classroom, but give them one class. Almost every department chairman said, yes, you do that. I mean, it's their benefit. It released them and so on. So I went to Brooklyn College and said, we'll arrange a program. They'll teach regularly. They'll make out programs their own programs, a daily program. So at the end of the year, they'll have a whole structure in hand, in a booklet form, for teaching for a whole year with all the teaching problems. Plus, they'll have one class which will be their own to fail in on a daily basis and learn with the teacher in the classroom to teach them. So that became the program. It really grew. There was no one in New York City doing that. Of course, things get out. So I had this program going, and I visited them 3 times a year to their own class, where they were Mr. or Miss or whatever. They were the teacher. And the kids loved it because they had a young teacher, almost their own age. You have a junior high school where someone is only 4 years older than they are, or 5 years older, whatever, or in a high school class where they're only 2 years older than they are. So they were very excited about it. It was a very, very successful program. All those teachers got jobs immediately in the schools where they were, unless they were not so favored, but they all got jobs right away. And they went out and they became very successful teachers. A landscape has different tonal shadows within a very short distance of one another, so that there are areas that pop out of the landscape at you that you see first, or earliest, or earlier, because of the groupings and the accidents of the way light shines through the trees. And for me, at an early stage, I mean very early, I learned that 40 years ago. So I initially called them frames, and that's how I started painting in the landscape, by framing out. So if I was painting my apple trees, as I did in the early days, very complex stuff, and I immediately looked at the painting and I realized that as I looked at it, it was a lot of different areas. And so I found a more dramatic area, and I took the branches that were nearby and I framed it. So sometimes they would be rectangular, I mean all kinds of distorted shapes. They weren't nice, neat rectangles, but they would be an irregular rectangle, a parallelogram, a six-sided parallelogram, pentagon shape. So I would find a shape, and when I would start my painting out, I would go right into the canvas and make a general sense of what the design was like, and I would locate that frame and I would paint it. And I did a frame a day, if I could. So sometimes they would be pretty detailed in it, a lot of structures, inside framing and leaves and all that kind of stuff. So let's say a pentagon, I'd paint it, paint the branches around it, then paint the whole interior. And I was lucky if I could get it done in a day. The next day I came out, I had no trouble finding myself. My frame was there, I could find it easily on the tree, and the tree was not a massive stuff I couldn't understand. I now had a sense of what the orchestration of all the parts were, because I had one piece to work on. And I would look over the tree, and I would find another dramatic area. Because after my first thrust or first painting, I figured out that when you come to the landscape, there's dramatic stuff that catches your eye. So if there are 5 dramatic places in the tree, everything else is subordinate. There's some orchestration that goes on, like music. You have a theme, and you have a lot of other instruments in it. They're all orchestrated, they're going on, they're doing their bit. The violins are playing their part, and the oboes are playing some part in the back. They're not the main musical theme, but they're part of the musical theme. But while all that's going on, those other parts are going on, there is a musical theme, and that's holding your attention. You know, all those other sounds are going on, and they're helping out. And that's what goes on in the tree. So I would find my 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, sometimes as best as 5, probably not more than that. And I would find the second one, and I would make a quick drawing. I didn't know, no pre-drawing. I make a quick drawing with my brush to get over to where it is, if it's not located right next to what I did before. And I would frame that out and paint it for the day. So I had a lot of white canvas and these pieces that were stuck up, stitched up on the canvas growing on. But while that goes on, the whole tree is being drawn. I'm attaching pieces to it and things are going on. And now other parts of the story come. If the painting takes me a month, and sometimes it took me a month, and it's growing season, and apples are growing on the branch, and the branch that I may have drawn up here in the first week or so is now down here. So I said to myself, don't short the tree, paint in the branch a second time. Add the apples in where they are a second time. I'm not painting this apple tree, I'm painting apple tree. Forever apple tree, not this particular one, just the generation of apple tree. So I ended up doing what time brought to me. If in time branches dropped even a second time, and they would seem to be important, a vestigial element, a component that belonged to the orchestration that was going on, I would paint it a third time. So the paintings are not real apple trees, but the growth of an apple tree, the development of an apple tree. So these are totally invented, so they grow according to what I put down and what it seems like subsequently I ought to do with it. I put a stroke down in it, next day I come back, and suddenly that stroke seems to attach to something else somewhere, or I find I'm going to make a judgment now. I'm looking at this stroke over here. Maybe when I came back, I must have said to myself, I've got to put something in here for that stroke. And I put this one in there. It looks parallel to it. It seems to have the same density that this one has, which I try to bring to it. And I brought those two together. I brought those two together with a bigger space between the two of them and left a smaller space out at the end of the painting. Later on, I brought some lighter ones nearby. It all keeps growing. But it's like that process I mentioned earlier. You put something down and you relate it to something else, which then moves over to something else. It creates another visual degree or element that you see that seems reasonable, and you orchestrate on that. You add some other strokes in to help the spacing, if the spacing doesn't seem to be right. So as you keep on going, it simply is a generative thing. It simply tells its own story. And then suddenly, at some point, it's over. You say to yourself, that's it.